Is computer science even worth studying in 2024 with all the layoffs, AI potentially taking over the field, and the oversaturation from all the new people going into the field? Hi, welcome to episode 22 of Backs of All Trades podcast. I'm going to be answering a lot of those questions and more in today's episode on whether I think it's worth it to even study computer science in today's day and age. Computer science has become wildly popular over the past probably 5 to 10 years or so. Compensation is really high, or at least it has been historically. And people have known that work-life balance is actually pretty good, right? A lot of these positions at least used to be remote. And so a ton of people went into the field. But now there's a lot of stuff going on. I mentioned them in the first sentence, but they've been seeing all the layoffs over the past 2 years, and that's concerning them, especially people who are about to study or are currently studying computer science. Additionally, people are wondering if they can go to things like boot camps and get in that way. Furthermore, there's new tools, artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT, things like Devin, which I'll go into in a minute. And so a lot of people think that artificial intelligence is actually going to take over software engineering as one of the first jobs that it really sort of makes obsolete. So I'll be discussing that. And then the last one really is computer science oversaturated? I think that's a big question people have because new grads are really struggling to find jobs these days. And therefore the kind of sentiment is, oh, we're all doomed. The field isn't what it used to be. It's oversaturated. I'm going to go through these kind of one by one. I'm going to start with artificial intelligence. And is AI taking over or going to take over software engineering? And in my opinion, the answer is a resounding no. When you do not know a lot about computer science, it can be easy to think that as soon as you start seeing something type out code, oh, we're doomed, right? It's already there. It can already be a software engineer. But in reality, coding is not only such a small part of software engineering, scoping, project requirements, understanding what the customer actually needs, working with other people, just interpersonal communication. There's so much more. Debugging, writing good code reviews, writing readable code that other people can understand. There's so much more to being a software engineer than just typing away at a keyboard. And I think that a lot of people who aren't in the field or are very new to the field don't really understand that. And so they think as soon as you can ask ChatGPT to write you a hello world, that software engineering is doomed, which it's not. And then there's tools like Devin, right? Devin came out and Devin was supposed to be the first AI software engineer. It was super like an impressive demo, I won't lie. And again, people are like, well, that's it. It's wraps for software engineers. We have maybe 6 months, a year left. And I made a couple videos on my short form recently. I highly suggest you go check out the YouTube channel, Internet of Bugs. He recently did a 25-minute expose on how Devin basically lied. Like their demo was just not what they were really construing it to be. It was writing its own bugs to then fix them. It was hallucinating entire files. It was kind of marketed as like, hey, you can post an Upwork job and Devin will be able to do it. It didn't even really do the task at hand. It hallucinated stuff, like I said, and it took over a day to complete. And that's not really, it was a fairly simple task. The individual who made the video, Internet of Bugs, which I'll actually link it in the description below, he was able to complete it in like 30 minutes. So really a lot of people think that AI is this silver bullet that will be able to do everything. And in reality, I just don't think that's the case. I gave the example on my short form, but I think it's good to bring it up here that the first time that a car was able to drive without a person behind it, like be able to move, was decades and decades ago, right? Like 30, 40 years ago, a car could move without a human. And immediately people are like, oh, that's it. Like we're going to have autonomous driving vehicles on the road. Nobody will be driving their own car by like the early 2000s. It's currently 2024. How close are we really to having everybody not driving their own car? I mean, we're still so far away. And what I really think this is in order to get to a point that's kind of like passable, right? So in the case of software engineering, writing some code is maybe 80, 90% of the way there. But to get to that 100% mark, to actually be able to replace a human, and in the case of autonomous driving, to get from driving on a course without any obstacles to being able to drive in the real world with real conditions, always, anywhere, every time. That's where the real bulk of the work is. That's where like 99% of the actual effort and the hard problems are. And those take a long time to solve. And so that's the reason why we don't have autonomous driving yet. And that's the reason why AI won't be able to straight up replace software engineers anytime soon, because there's, again, all of the things that I mentioned before with the nuance of what actually software engineering is. Just writing code, it's a fraction of what a software engineer does. So what do I think that will AI affect software engineering? Absolutely, it'll affect software engineering, but it'll be more of a tool in your tool belt to make yourself more efficient. Think about how different the software engineering field was just 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, things like the cloud didn't exist, and a bunch of frameworks and languages that are now industry standard literally didn't exist yet. So did software engineers who have been in the industry for 20 years, did they become obsolete, or were they replaced by those technologies that now have existed that have transformed the way that software engineers actually work? No, of course not, because those who stay up to date with the times, up to date with the technologies, will remain relevant. If you live under a rock and you think that the field is not going to change at all for the next 10 years, if you look at AI and you're like, we're doomed because it's going to change how we work, of course it will. That's how technology works. It changes the paradigm of what your work looks like. And you will if you stay up to date with that, you will be just fine. And I'm actually super excited. There's some really cool AI tools right now. I use ChatGPT almost every day to assist in my coding. It doesn't replace me, it assists in it. And I think that's what it's going to become more and more like. Going way, way back, like programmers literally used to program on punch cards, like physical punch cards. There wasn't a computer to code on. And so if you wanted to write a program, you were punching holes on a physical card, and that's what the computer would read. And did the computer replace those people? No. Again, technology actually improves and makes yourself more efficient. And then, of course, people will say, oh, but if it makes software engineers more efficient, the demand software engineers will go down. I'll discuss that in a minute when it comes to like the whole layoffs and everything like that. But in my opinion, if you are replaced by AI in the terms of software engineering, if you're just straight up replaced, you're a bot. Like, you were never that qualified of an engineer if you got replaced by a machine who can do your job better than you can do, because that means you didn't stay up to date with the times and you were never that good to begin with. Another thing about the AI thing is that people will say, oh, but the CEO of NVIDIA said that kids shouldn't learn how to program anymore, right? There was some famous speech where he said that recently. And when he was saying like people shouldn't learn how to code anymore, he's not saying that like software engineering is dying or that AI is going to replace everything. If you actually go watch the clip, what he says is that eventually the programming language will become human, right? So programmers, as I mentioned, used to code on punch cards. Then they coded in assembly. Then they coded in higher compiled level languages like C. And now there's even higher languages that are closer. We're getting closer and closer to English, right? If you look at Python compared to assembly, it's a lot more human readable. So eventually it makes sense that eventually we'll get to just natural language. You'll be able to just tell the computer what you want to code, and that'll become the programming language. That does not mean that software engineers are replaced, because you still need to understand the fundamentals and what you're actually trying to build and how to solve the problem at hand. Computers won't be able to do that. But what he's saying is that you shouldn't focus on like the syntax and all of this other things that I think a lot of people get wrong, again, when they think that software engineering is just coding, when coding is a small fraction of software engineering. I think that's really the crux of the issue here. And so, in my opinion, what he was actually getting at is that you should study computer science. You should study these large topics. You should go understand how artificial intelligence and these tools actually work, but don't get so bogged down in learning, for example, C, because that's not ultimately what we're all going to be coding in for the future. You will become obsolete. That would be the equivalent of learning how to code on punch cards. I think that's what he was getting at. Moving along to the layoffs, because I think a lot of people don't really understand. So there was kind of a perfect storm, right? With the AI and the layoffs and a bunch of people going into the field. And again, I'm breaking them down one by one, but people saw the layoffs. It kind of happened around AI, and people are like, oh, we're doomed. Like, all of these companies are replacing people with AI, or for whatever reason. I want to explain why these layoffs happened, particularly in the tech sector, because a lot of people seem to not understand them. So if you look back at like 2019, 2018, software engineering was nearing its highs, and people had realized we need a ton of software engineers. Like, every company needed software engineers because every company was becoming a technology company. It doesn't matter what company you are. It doesn't matter if you're Home Depot or Coca-Cola, you're becoming ultimately a technology company. And so they realized we need software engineers. And at that point, the supply and the demand, there was not enough software engineers to fill the roles that everybody wanted. And so that's where things like boot camps came about, because boot camps were literally made because of the market need, where they could teach somebody how to code in 6 months, which again, I'm not a fan of boot camps. I don't think that you can become a software engineer in 6 months. It's just simply too deep of a field. It's almost like analogous to when I use the tool and the tool belt example. It would be like if you said you were a mechanic because you were taught how to use a hammer and a nail. Like that is, you're not a mechanic yet. You know one very small thing. You don't even know how anything really works. But that's what a boot camp does, is it teaches you how to use a couple frameworks or maybe one single framework, and then tries to make you as hireable as possible for that specific thing. But when the field changes or when there's a layoff and you need to find a different position within the massive umbrella that is software engineering, it's going to be very difficult for you. So that's part of the reason why I don't like boot camps. And additionally, now after all the layoffs, the field has gotten so much more competitive, which again, I'll talk about in the oversaturation piece in a little bit. But the point being, if you are a boot camp grad competing with a degree, competing with somebody who has a degree in computer science from a well-respected institution, they're going to blow you away. So yeah, that's why I don't like boot camps. But back to 2019, 2020. So AI is, or not AI, software engineering is on the ups. Everyone needs to hire software engineers. And then what happens? We have a global pandemic where everyone is locked inside. And so they start using this technology even more. Companies like Netflix, Twitch, YouTube, like these massive technology products that you use have an enormous spike in user growth, Instagram, Facebook, et cetera. And so like 300, 400% user growth. And so they are like, wow, we need more talent now. Like, this is incredible. We're having the biggest boom we've ever had. Let's hire more talent. So they hire a ton more software engineers, even more than they were hiring in 2018 and 2019. And they now have a super bloated organization because, the other thing about that time is interest rates, which is set by the Federal Reserve, was set to basically zero, meaning borrowing money from either investors or the public markets is incredibly cheap. So they can actually afford to not really care about making profits right now, right? Now they're just focused on building the business, and they basically tell the investors, you give us money, we'll go turn this into a massive return later. And because money is so cheap, the investors are like, okay, sure. Like, here's a ton of money, go hire a ton of people. And so the combination of people using these products a lot, being super just locked inside, and then money being basically free, meaning there's no interest rate, meant that these companies way overhired. Like almost every single technology company, all the big ones, way overhired. Now, look, 3-4 years later, what happened? We've had the largest increase in rate hikes in history. And so now money is no longer free. What happens when money is no longer free? Investors want to see more of a return on investment because they could put it just in the bank and get a guaranteed like 5%. And so what that means is there's more pressure on these companies to actually make money. And if they were to go and borrow money, it would be even more expensive for them to borrow money now. And so now companies are having oh, wow, we way overhired moment. And we need to now start actually showing a higher profit. And the most expensive thing in any organization is employees. And so what they do, they start releasing people who aren't working on stuff that makes money. And the thing that I think a lot of people didn't realize about this is these are technology companies, but they didn't just lay off software engineers. They laid off a ton of HR, recruiters, salespeople, and software engineers. But software engineers were actually a relatively small portion of the layoffs. And so they just basically had to trim down a lot of the fat, which unfortunately in this case is actual human beings who are making a salary, but they needed to show higher profits. And that is the only reason there were layoffs. This is an acutely bad market condition for the field of software engineering, but honestly for technology as a whole. If you're in HR and tech, it's hard right now as well. The other thing is, like, when you think about 2019, right? People are now looking at the market today and comparing it to the market, like I said, in 2019, which is really and truly anybody with a pulse who could type on a keyboard could get a software engineering job. There were people who held multiple software engineering jobs at the same time. People who would work like 10 hours or 5 hours a week per job and were so-called overemployed and held multiple jobs. And people straight out of college were getting like 250 grand plus. That clearly was not sustainable, right? You cannot compare current market conditions, which again are poor, to when they were the most peak bubble, unsustainable time of software engineering history. It's unfair to compare it to that. And people will look at the market today and be like, well, we're doomed forever. You may not have been around for this, but during the 2008 Great Recession, we had similar hiring patterns. During even more acutely in tech was the dot-com bubble around 2001, where there were even worse, like Amazon fell over 90% during that time. And of course, there were a ton of layoffs among all of these companies. And so we have similar hiring patterns now than we did around both of those times. And did the tech market improve and even become stronger and grow massive after that? Of course it did. The same thing will happen again, because underlying the technology field is the future, right? Software, artificial intelligence, progressing in these fields. Software is only going to become more relevant, right? So it's ridiculous to think that because acutely in this short time frame there are some layoffs, that is a projection of the field dying. If you compare it to a more traditional dying field, like unfortunately journalism or traditional media, this is stuff where money and interest and everything is going down, right? It's a decreasing field. It is not growing. Therefore, that is much closer to an oversaturated field, which I'll talk about in a second, because there are too many people looking for jobs and there are jobs available and there are not as many new jobs being created as people graduating. That's a true oversaturation. That is not the case here. This was a people way overhired. Now it's a market correction. Will it recover? Absolutely. I would put my entire life savings on the tech market recovering, and then we'll start to grow again. Now, let's talk about oversaturation, because I think a lot of people are concerned that so many people have started going into the field that it is not going to be, that basically they're not going to have a chance. And kind of what I just said, that there are more positions or more people looking for positions than positions available. That really is the definition of oversaturation. And CS, computer science, does actually not meet that. I think a lot of people don't realize that every single company basically on earth, if you're a big company, you have software engineers. And therefore, it is one of like the biggest fields right now. And you might not believe me, but there are still more jobs, more software engineering jobs being created than there are computer science graduates. And you're like, how is that possible? Like, all of my friends have never, or like they're struggling to get a job right now. All of your friends are applying to like the top 10 companies. We're talking about the FANGs of the world. And those are the most competitive jobs to get in software engineering. Of course, it's going to be hard to land those jobs. You're not guaranteed admission to Google. Google has actually a lower application to hire rate than it does to get into Harvard. It's something like 0.2% of applicants actually get a job at Google. So don't be surprised when you're not in the 0.2% if you're not in the top 0.2% of developers. But you know who is hiring software engineers? Coca-Cola, Chick-fil-A, Home Depot, Delta, like so many companies, every company basically is hiring software engineers, but they don't pay as much. And so people are like, oh, I don't want to work for them. And then they apply to the top 100 biggest software companies, which again are super competitive because the layoffs that I mentioned, people are generally just not hiring that much right now. And a lot more people did go into the field, but the pure gap of the amount of people who needed software engineers to the amount of software engineers available, this was like 2019. Now we're just getting closer. We're not like this, but we're just getting closer. And so it makes sense that a very nice field, right? Field with great pay, great work-life balance, generally good flexibility, right? It's a field that a lot of people want to go into for good reason. It makes sense that a field that everyone would want to go into would be competitive. It wouldn't just be you be able to go to get a degree in computer science, not hold any internships, not hold anything, and be able to land a job at a competitive company. Doesn't that seem like a little bit broken? If you think about really sought after positions like investment banking, there's a reason why it's so exclusive. And there's a reason why so few people get into that. It's because of how much they pay. The incentive is so great that the competition there is very great. Would you call IB oversaturated? I don't know. Some people might, but in my opinion, it's a little bit different. So that's why I say, like, don't confuse healthy competition with oversaturation. The field should be competitive because it's a great field to work in. And the people who are the best at their jobs should land the most sought after jobs. And on this note, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I want to apologize to like bootcamp graduates, especially in 2024. I just simply think you are going to have an incredibly difficult time in today's market because The boot camps were, in my opinion, a product of when there was such a big difference in the amount of software engineers available to the people who wanted to hire software engineers. Now that we're closer, people can compare for their sought after position multiple CS graduates from top institutions. And so if you're in that lineup and you have no degree and just a boot camp, it is going to be incredibly hard for you to stand out. And especially at the top companies, like I mentioned, the FANGs, right? Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. I'll throw Microsoft in there, OpenAI, some startups as well, right? The top positions, they are getting tens, if not hundreds of thousands of applications. I do not care how many projects you've done. I do not care how cool your experience is. Your resume is going through an algorithm. You're not even getting touched by a human. And a lot of the times you're getting thrown out immediately if you don't meet certain requirements, whether that's a GPA requirement, a school requirement, a language or like technical skills requirement, right? And it's a lot more complicated than that. These algorithms have a lot of things, but nobody is going to check your GitHub for your fancy project that you did. I'm sorry. Like they just don't have the time. You probably still maybe can land a job at a smaller company, maybe a local company, and that can be a great way to get into the field. But it's just simply going to be an uphill battle in today's market if you do not have a degree. Sort of summing up that part, right? Is it more difficult to get a job in software engineering in 2024 than it was in 2019? Absolutely. Of course it is. But is it oversaturated? Well, ask yourself the question that I kind of alluded to. Is technology and software going to be more or less relevant in 5 years from now? And my answer is, of course, it's going to be more relevant. It is still a growing field. And even when people talk about AI and stuff, I want to take a little aside and talk about is AI going to make software engineers so efficient such that the demand for software engineers go down? In my opinion, no, because even if you have let's say you have now 2 software engineers that can do the work of 5, right? That means, wow, we can hire 5 software engineers and be twice as productive or more than twice as productive. They're not going to because ultimately they're not budgeting based on the smallest employee base possible. They want to make the most money possible. And for them to hire people, they are making the bet that if I hire this person, I will be able to make more money with them on my team than if I didn't have them. And so if all of a sudden software engineers just become more efficient, it won't necessarily mean they'll hire less software engineers. They'll probably hire the same amount or more and just be able to produce a lot more output, AKA make a lot more money. And so I don't necessarily buy the argument that just because some people get more efficient, the demand for that field goes down. Nobody has a crystal ball, but in my opinion, artificial intelligence will actually create more jobs than it makes obsolete. And I don't think it'll make software engineering jobs obsolete anytime soon. If we look at any technological revolution in history, whether it's farming equipment to make farmers more efficient, the industrial revolution to make factories more efficient, it has always created more jobs than it has made obsolete. So will some people lose their job in the process? Yes, absolutely. But will it create more wealth, more jobs, more economic output on the whole? In my opinion, 100% yes. And nobody has, like I said, nobody has a crystal ball. I might be factually wrong, but I think it would be foolish to look at this time, this change of the paradigm, and be like, this time is different than every other time we've made this big of a jump in technology in history. I don't think we're there. I think that this will probably be similar to the previous ones. And if we look back like 15 years from now, looking back to now, we'll be like, wow, yeah, we're so much more efficient as a society and we just have so much more wealth because of artificial intelligence. I don't think we'll be there looking and be like, AI took our jobs 5 years ago and now everybody's on the streets. I just don't think that's going to happen. Is it still worth it to study computer science in 2024? Kind of wrapping things up. My answer is absolutely. Absolutely, it's still worth it. If you are somebody who's thinking about pursuing a field in computer science, you are talking about 5, 10, 20, 40 years, right? Nobody's hopping in this career to jump out in like 2 years. Or if you are, that's not really a career at that point. And if you're looking at that time horizon, you shouldn't be so focused acutely on this 18-month period where it's somewhat difficult, because again, it's been like this before. It was like this in 2008. It was like this during the dot-com bubble. it will be like this again. This same cycle happens in the economy over and over. If you are deterred enough to maybe stop pursuing this because you're scared of AI taking over the field, or the layoffs lead you to believe that it's a dying field, or you think that there's just too much competition now, right? It's oversaturated and you'll never be able to land a job, then maybe the field isn't for you. Because again, you will need to change with this field. You will need to grow into your career. And the people who if you think that the field is supposed to remain static, it's not going to. In 10 years from now, your job will look very different than what it looks like today. And if you're so scared about the time right now, then honestly, I worry for those type of people when they actually go into software engineering. Know that it is going to be competitive. Like, yes, it is harder than it was in 2019. It's a great field to be in. It makes sense that there's a healthy competition. If you want to know how to land like your first internship, I actually did a video on that. It's my most popular video on this channel, but there are things you can do to stand out and remain competitive, even in today's society when it's a bit more oversaturated. And I can't think of a more defining field over the next 10 years than computer science, software engineering, and particularly artificial intelligence. So when people look at this field and they're saying this is the one that's going to be replaced, or this is the one that's going to die, it kind of blows my mind, because I can't think of a single other field that will determine how our life looks more over the next 10 years than this field. So to bow that one out first is kind of mind blowing. This is a little bit of a tangent, but if you're like particularly interested in artificial intelligence and you want to actually become like an AI developer or like a machine learning engineer, know that that is a very, very technical field, far more technical than, say, like a web developer, and usually requires you to pursue a master's or even a PhD, like a doctorate in machine learning or artificial intelligence. So if that's what you want to do, go for it. But just know that you're looking at a lot more education and a lot more specialization than just like a general software engineer. Additionally, do it for enjoyment, or like partial enjoyment, not just for the money. If you're someone who's purely motivated by the money, then when stuff happens like this, that's where you like freak out and you're like, oh, I'm not going to be able to make a lot of money. You might have to take a, less paying job right now when the market's not as good, and then go to a bigger job after that by working hard. But you're not likely to stick it out through these, through thick and thin. Right now we're in a thick. And if you're not going to be able to stick it out through that, then because you're only motivated by money, and maybe you won't land a job as quickly as you expected, or maybe you won't, or maybe you'll get laid off because, it's just the market we're in. And if you're like, oh, well, that's it from me, I'm now going to something else, then you probably weren't going to make it to begin with, in my opinion. That's really it. Yes, computer science is still worth it to study in 2024. I think that I hopefully dispelled a lot of the worries, but also straight up rumors that I find factually false about oversaturation, AI taking over the field, and the general reasoning for all these layoffs. If this was helpful to you, please leave a comment below. I know that a lot of people are scared right now. There's mass hysteria over this sort of question. If you want to see any other types of videos, please leave those in the comments below. If you're listening on any podcast platform, please give me 5 stars, like, subscribe if you're on YouTube. And as always, I will see you all in the next one.